Hello and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior Vice President and Executive Editor-at-Large at Black Enterprise. This episode of Beyond the Hype is brought to you by JP Morgan Chase. And man, we have a great guest for today's show and a great conversation, something that I am now passionate about since the pandemic, even though I've traveled a lot. But our guest is the leading expert in this space, especially for youth travel. And I'm here to welcome Tracey Friley, a lifelong award-winning entrepreneur, world traveler, and founder of Passport to Youth Travel. And Tracey's joining us for this very important conversation of travel, and in my case, for this show, youth travel in particular, in the wake of the pandemic. Welcome to the show, Tracey.
Well, thanks for having me, Alfred. I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you today, really.
Now, I always do my disclaimers for people that I really know well, so that people don't just think, Tracey and I go back. Tracey is a very important part of Black enterprise history because she was the winner of the very, very, very first Black Enterprise Entrepreneur Summit pitch competition.
Wow.
Back when we weren't giving money yet.
No.
So she was
I didn't get money. I got a TV show. I got some stuff though.
Yeah, you got some stuff.
Yeah.
But to show you how it was a brand new idea back at the time. Excellent first entrepreneur to win that recognition, obviously by your track record since. So I always like to point it out because Tracey really is part of Black enterprise history. But Tracey, why don't we start talking about who you are, what you do, and how we're coming to this conversation around international travel, the importance of it. Particularly not just for young people, but in general, but also navigating travel as an industry, as a space in the current COVID-19 environment.
Right. Yeah, I have been traveling for as long as I can remember, to be honest with you. I'm not a country counter, so I can probably tell you more places that I haven't been, that I have been. But I don't think I'll ever get every place I want to on my wish list in my lifetime. But I traveled with my parents as a kid, and I traveled independently from my parents as a kid too. They gave me that gift. I wasn't able to do study abroad because it really wasn't even, to be honest with you, something I considered at the time. But I did travel with my family. And again, like I said, on my own. As an adult, though, I started to, consider my travel history and all the spaces that I had been fortunate enough to travel to, and found in my generation, it might be a little different now, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me in the spaces where I was getting to go. And as an adult, I think the seed was planted early without me even really knowing it, that I wanted to bring along kids that look like me to the places that I had been because they were magnificent. They were wonderful. I learned about myself. I learned about other cultures. I learned that I deserved to be in the same spaces, and so do other Black and brown children that I was going to. And so in 2009, I don't know if you remember this, but Oprah had a philanthropic organization called Oprah's Angel Network.
I do remember that.
You do remember that?
Yes.
And they put a call out, and they would ask people, they would give you a subject and then ask you to write, an essay, basically, about your thoughts on it. And they asked about camp. And so I wrote this essay about travel camp and my experience, and they published it. And for me, it was almost like a wink. It was permission. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to do it then, right? This thing that had been brewing, I thought, well, I'm just going to do it. And so I got myself together in about a year and a half's time. And I ultimately, in 2010, took my first group of kids to St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands, to a place called Cinnamon Bay that has since been swept away and is being rebuilt by a few hurricanes. But it was a place that I loved. And the only Black and brown people I saw were islanders, right? I wasn't seeing them in the space enjoying it. like I was. And so I took my first group of girls back then. And what planted the seed for my career in youth travel advocacy after that was I got to, we were on our way out of St. John, and one girl had a passport. And it struck me that in the moment, I was like, wow. And I actually had a talk with the guy at the gate about that. And he's like, yeah, you can get into the US Virgin Islands without a passport. You could also in our generation get into Mexico, Canada, Puerto Rico, all kinds of places. Puerto Rico is not foreign, but you could get into places without that. And so, but it struck me that it was really important for kids at a minimum, let alone the travel part, that they should have a passport. It changes how they think about themselves, right? It changes, they're like, oh, this book, this blue book that is a privilege and a gift, actually, right? Changes their view. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, you mean I can go pretty much anywhere I want to go? And that's the start of it. And then the rest is using it, I guess.
I want to spend some more time about this idea of having a passport and that being a typical common thing among Americans in general, because it's not. It's certainly among Black and brown people in America. Right. And I came to it because I was totally untraveled until I went off to college and graduated. I mean, I could barely tell you how many states I'd been to. I'm from a small town on the Jersey Shore in Long Branch, New Jersey. All my Long Branch people know. But so I went from that to my first wife is from Jamaica.
Okay.
So when two things happened. My first wife was from Jamaica. So the mother of my three older children, they had passports, like, because they were going to go home to Jamaica. It was like, of course we got a passport. We got to go home. We're going to go home to grandma's farm in Jamaica. And then because I was a magazine journalist, my first magazine job, I got to go to Barbados to cover. There's an artist, you and I would remember him, Eugene Wilde. My kids wouldn't know who he is. But,
yes, and my family is from Barbados. I'm a Bayesian American girl.
Okay, all right. So, let me take that back. Not Barbados, Bermuda. Even though I've been to Barbados many times, it's Bermuda. My first trip was Bermuda. But he was shooting a music video there, and I was working for a magazine called Modern Black Men. And they were like, "Oh, we're going to Bermuda," and I'm like, "Okay, great." And they're like, "You have a passport?" And I'm like,
Yikes.
And that was when, but even then, and I want to contrast that deeper into the conversation to now, I still only thought of travel as something you only did if you had to do for work. Like I traveled a lot for Black Enterprise over about 30 years, going to very nice places, including Barbados, including Aruba, but it was always like, oh, there's a conference there, so that's where we're going. Or I have a speech there, so that's where we're going. So it's only in the last, since my children have become adults, and my oldest daughter is always like, me and my girls, we're going. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You could go, but you can't even have that conversation if you don't start with having a passport. And that's why I've always been fascinated by the trail you blaze in the lives of many people, because if you get the passport, then all of a sudden you have many great reasons to travel.
Right.
But if you don't have a passport, you think, well, I don't need to go anywhere because I don't have a passport, so it doesn't matter.
Right. And what's that saying? You don't have to get ready. I'm lame this morning.
If you stay ready, you don't have to.
You don't have to get ready, right?
Yeah. Or my thing about why I always tell young men you need to have a tuxedo. They would tell me, oh, well, I don't go to any formal occasions, so I don't need a tuxedo. I said, no, you don't go to formal events because you don't have a tuxedo.
Right.
If you had a tuxedo, you go.
Right.
And so it's really getting equipped, and that merely being equipped with a passport opens, like you said, it opens your mind to what you think the possibilities are. You say, yeah, of course, I'm gonna go.
Right. Exactly. And they're ready. And I remember in the beginning getting criticism about the program because that's what people do.
Right.
And the question was
particularly Passport to Youth Travel. Is that the program?
Passport to Youth Travel. So I guess, I don't know. I think I know my own history and think everybody else does too, but it's not true. Okay. The Passport Party Project
Passport
was,
Party Project.
right.
That's what you told me about before, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That is was a global awareness initiative that gifted underrepresented, not to be confused with poor, at risk, or what some media would say needy. I was like, yeah, no, that's not it. But it really gave underrepresented teen girls nationwide an opportunity to get their first passports, right? And that was my original mission. And the criticism was, well, so what, right? What are they going to do with it after that? Well, the so whats were coming from travelers, right? From people who already who are in it, to be honest, in a travel bubble. And, you might hear Black people say, hey, well, I know lots of Black people who travel, tons of them. And I'm like, yeah, well, in your bubble, that's true. But statistically, when you look at passport statistics, like in 2010, I think there were only 38%, 38% of Americans had a US passport. Like in contrast, Canada and the UK and Europe, like 70, 80, 90%, right? So I accept criticism. I'm cool with it because it gets you to think. And I was able to, did I even say what the Passport Party Project was?
You touched on it, but go into some more detail. Yeah, it's about
it was so I was in the right place at the right time. So after, let me start over since we're chit chatting.
We're chit chatting. Let's go on. Just say how you got to say it.
Okay. I told you I took that first group in 2010.
Right.
Then I took another group of kids like locally up here to Shasta. We did a houseboat weekend over Labor Day weekend. Then I took another group back to St. John in the Caribbean. And in between that second trip and my foray into the whole passport thing, I decided to go into my pocket and gift 8 kids, because remember, I had the seed planted, to gift 8 kids with their first passports. So I took them to a local passport office. We had a global awareness day, which I ultimately started calling passport parties. We talked about travel. I was really surprised to learn that kids know where they want to go. At 11, 12, 13 years old. And I didn't even realize that at the time. I thought I was, doing this thing and I was going to expose them to all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, well, I want to go to China and let me tell you why. Or I want to go to Africa and let me tell you why, right? They knew what they wanted to do. So I ultimately went to a travel writing conference, just randomly, no reason, no agenda, and was in the right place at the right time. And because I had practiced pitching and won with Black Enterprise, when someone called on me and said, hey, what's your dream for travel? I was like, well, I've started my dream for travel. I want to empower kids through diverse teens in particular through travel. And, I gave my little speech and I did it from the heart, because one of the gifts that I got from winning the Black Enterprise competition was that Simon Sinek was on the pitch show that you all gave me an opportunity to be on in New York. And I was fumbling when it was time for me to be on camera. And he pulled me to the side and he said, look, I know they told you to prepare and to have your numbers and all these things. He said, but I'm going to tell you something that you need to take with you for the rest of your life. And you need to speak from the heart, right? Don't worry about the numbers. The stats are the stats. They are what they are. Speak from the heart. And so on that day, years later, I did the very same thing. And I spoke from the heart. I got a standing ovation from people in the travel industry. And Expedia was in the room. And
wow.
I got home and I ultimately, long story short, I ended up with a high 5-figure deal. And for the next 2 years, I traveled around the United States gifting underrepresented teen girls nationwide with their first passports through a series of passport parties. So I went to 10 cities, and I had a global awareness day, and then ultimately gave them the money for them to go out and get their first passports. I had the support of all the travel writers I knew, all the travelers I knew, and that was a great phase one effort. And at the end of that, I was able to take 6 of those girls to Belize to get their first passport stamp. And so that was my first group with the passport party project. And ultimately I had a phase 2 and a phase 3 that was much smaller in scale because I didn't have Expedia anymore. But I got back, I won some other, I was a finalist in another contest, and I got back from Costa Rica after pitching there, pitch. And I got a call, and someone said, well, this is so-and-so from National Geographic Travel. And I was like, no, it's not. And we are vetting you for a Traveler of the Year award. And I was like, who is this, right? And I ultimately won a National Geographic Traveler of the Year award. But let me say this, when you work with your head down and you do heart work, right? Something that's really important to you, you don't work for awards.
Right.
So these nods and winks that I've gotten over the years for the work only propelled me further. And I did about close to a 10-year run of passports and kids trips and this whole thing. And at the end of 2019, without knowing COVID was coming, I had decided that I had done 10 years of work, and I had a good body of work. I was really proud, but happened to be really tired. It's a lot of work. It's probably the hardest job I've ever had, and the most meaningful. And I imagine when you're trying to change something, that whole change maker thing, that it has to be hard work. If it were easy, as somebody used to say to me before, everybody would be doing it.
Right.
So, and I'm not the only one who does it, but I did it in the way that I did it. I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you at the end of my pitch all those years ago why I won. And you told me that as you were one of the judges, and there were other judges too, but you told me that for you, when you asked, why wouldn't somebody else go out and do the same thing you did? And from the heart, I basically said, because they're not me. Right? You and I can have the same idea about what we want to do for people, but the way we go about doing it is where our signature is.
I do remember that, because again, just as you were early in your career pitching your businesses, I was just getting my first 2 years of being judging, not just for Black Enterprise, but I was recruited to judge at the national pitch competitions. And with that seed you planted about what makes an effective pitch, I say to this day, it's not about who has the idea, it's about who has the execution.
Right.
And I have a nickname, this is gonna be the first time you ever hear it, from my favorite mentees, entrepreneurs. But my friends know, if I call somebody an executioner, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I was like, because everybody has great ideas and they sound great and they sound brilliant. And I said, then there's if Tracey has an idea, I'm gonna look up and it's gonna be done. She's an executioner.
Kind of a doer. Yeah.
And that's what, in my opinion, I mean, not just great entrepreneurs, but great entrepreneurs have in common. Look, there are a lot of brilliant people in the world. There are a lot of great ideators. We all have great ideas during the course of my lifetime, but it's the thing that gets done that matters. And you're right, that was a meaningful answer to a question that I didn't even appreciate as deeply as I do now, the meaning of even asking that question.
Yeah, well, you planted a lot of seeds for me. So I really, and that's the thing about seeds, and even doing it with kids, it's a seed. And so it takes the time it takes for it to grow.
Yes.
And some plants grow faster, some grow slower, but the point is that there's a change.
Absolutely.
And even with travel with kids, one way or another, they get to decide, after given all this information, if this is something that interests them. You can take kids on trips and I don't know, maybe they don't like it. I don't know. I haven't had a lot of that, but maybe that's not the path they take. I've had a lot of kids come back to me. I don't know how they got older and I didn't, but I've had all these kids come back to me years later. One of them came and worked for me. She said, I don't know if you remember me, but you gave me my first passport when I was 15 years old. And I listened to everything you said. And I was like, oh, you have to be careful what you tell kids, right? I listened to everything you said, and I did everything you said. You said we could travel for free if we just looked in the right places for grants and programs and through college. She said, I've been here and here and here and here and here, and I want to return the favor. I want to do for them what you did for me. What can I do? And she worked for me for three trips. And I've had kids come back to me and say, oh, now I'm going to Brazil for 3 weeks. And I want you to know, because you were the person that told me I could. Now it takes a village. So I'm not taking credit for anything. I'm saying that combined with parents who get it, right? Who understand the value of independent travel, because vacationing with your parents is fabulous, right? There's learning opportunities, but having a kid go away on their own changes something in every kid. It might be a different something, but it changes something in every child. And
no, I really am feeling you on what you're saying, because a couple of things. One, we already talked about the perception of where you are allowed to go once you go.
Right.
And that's not just geography, that's professionally, entrepreneurially, what you're allowed to do once you feel like you can pretty much go anywhere and do anything is a big, big deal in terms of opening possibilities. The second thing, though, is, and I'm saying this now because I'm actually one of my mentees, who's very young. She's actually a 15-year-old earning her PhD in behavioral health at Arizona State University. Yes,
that's awesome.
One of my youngest mentees. But she has a company, and part of what her company does is take teenagers we're going to Ghana next month. To do some projects there. And, I've been invited to help as one of the adults in the group, a couple with some parents. But just the mere idea of an 11-year-old, like you said, already kind of knowing where they want to go. A 14-year-old saying, yo, let's go to Ghana and do this. Let's go here and do that.
Yes.
There's so many light years ahead of me. I mean, I took my first train outside of my own town when I was 16. Like, that was like, oh my God, I'm out of town on a train by myself. How did I do this?
Right.
And so the reason why it's so important for me to, and I'm glad you were available to do Beyond the Hype, is because I don't call it a fear, and I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to the present, is now we're coming out of obviously a major pandemic, or we're still going through the evolution of a major pandemic. And I see that people are falling into two camps. One is, I'm never going to go anywhere again, ever again. Even to the extreme, I'm not leaving my neighborhood. I'm not leaving my house.
Yep.
Then there's me, and I've already told you, I've been traveling since I was 25 years old.
Right.
But it was always like, well, if work takes me there, I'll go. And if if there's a family trip, like you said, family trips, okay, we're going to go to Jamaica, I'll go to Jamaica.
Right.
What the isolation of the pandemic did for me, among many things, and it's probably that now I'm at an age where I'm like, if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it?
Right.
It's like, what about going just because you can go, and it's a great place to go, a great place to see, a great place to experience. And since in the past 6 months, I told you I went to Dubai.
Yes.
I went to the Maldives.
Jealous. Yes.
Crazy. I didn't even know where the Maldives was. Like, what is that? And it dawned on me, like, if I, at my age, at 61, now have this deep appreciation of someone who is well-traveled, who is educated, who is professional, and I'm just getting that appreciation. How important is it for your mission to continue in whatever form you pursue it? It's not going to be the same as passport parties as it was back in the day.
Right.
to me, it's important to plant some more seeds in more people, both adults and young people, like my mentee, her name is Dorothy Jean Tillman, that yes, a passport should be just like a basic, you know, you get your driver's license,
Exactly.
you graduate from high school,
Exactly.
and you get a passport.
Exactly.
And whether you use it now or you use it later, yes, the world is 100 times smaller than it was when we were teenagers. I mean, it's a little world now.
Yep.
It should be. So again, I can't say enough about how, to me, if your mission and your passion and your calling was important when you had it as a teenager, how much more important is it now, even in the current environment where there's a lot of disincentive to travel, but to me, there's even greater reason to travel, especially for young people.
Well, you said a couple of things, and I really had to write it down to remember because I wanted to make sure I said it. You know, fear and lack of trust are two things that I found that, and most of the families I dealt with were Black or maybe Hispanic, but mostly from diverse cultural backgrounds, right? Fear and lack of trust were the number one, and number two, actually they were neck and neck items that I had to deal with all the time. So the pandemic is more of the same, right? But so when I started, I thought, oh, I'm going to give out all these passports. I thought I was the Pied Piper of passports. It would be easy and I could just, people would want them. And I'd probably have more people than I had money to give out passports. And it ended up that I was hearing, yeah, no, from teachers, okay, which is shocking to me. It was at the time, still is a little bit.
Right.
And parents. She's too young for a passport. I don't have a passport. Why should she have a passport?
Wow.
She's not going anywhere. No, not giving her a passport. So now let's just talk about the kids who do have passports, who historically travel with their parents. Well, hey, I want you to send your kids with me so they can have this independence and growth. Oh no, my kids don't even go to sleepovers. So, and I went to a whole moms group and spoke to them. They're like, yeah, no, I work for the DA. These professional people, I work for the DA. It's too much horrible stuff going out in the world. No way, not doing it. If you took my kid to Paris or Costa Rica or Toronto, I'd have to be there trolling them, watching them, stalking them the whole time because I don't trust that they'll be okay. So for me to find parents that bought in to this idea that that I could do it. I had proved that I could do it, right? But that I could do it, and B, that I would get them home safe, because safety has always been a priority to me. It always will be. That's pretty much number one, was a big deal. So now here we are in pandemic, and I decided I needed a couple years to regroup from what just happened. I lost a lot, but I also gained a lot. And I wanted to continue this work. I want to create an army of people who do in some form or fashion what I did, this kind of teen travel program, but mostly the global awareness piece, because the travel part will come when the travel part comes for kids, right? It comes when it comes. It can come in college, it can come in high school, it can, and it comes with families, right? So that part can come, but I want to create an army of people, because if there were 100 of me doing what I did, then, just, 100 times more kids than the ones that I empowered, and the people who were watching would also be empowered. So
and then you can approach a tipping point, because that's what happens. It's a tipping point from no, we don't need this.
Right.
To, well, we may not need it, but it's not bad to have, because my peer group, whether it's parents or kids, but you don't have a passport? I got a passport. I don't know what I'm going to use it, but I have it.
Right.
And you're right. So the ability to replicate, and I'm being perfectly transparent. That's why I want you for Beyond the Hype, because we need to get this message out. And I'm looking at what my mentee is doing. And as a result, this is not her first trip out of the country with her employees. Basically, she has a STEAM camp where she trains teenagers to teach STEAM principles to other kids. But part of it is going I think they've been to the Bahamas, South Africa before the pandemic, and then they got derailed by the pandemic. Yeah. But it was the idea that, like you said, it's a small group, but now there's like 15 kids that have passports that wouldn't have a passport if they didn't have some kind of program to say, well, this is where we're going to go. And to go there, you got to have a passport. And as you said, that was a lot more about the parents' resistance than it was about the kids. The kids are like, Mom, I need a passport. And mom and dad are thinking of all the reasons why that's not really a good thing to do right at this point in time.
Right.
But they're also like, they don't want to be the bad guys that say, well, no, you can't go on this trip. So I just really am passionately in your corner about the need for more Tracey Frileys who can learn from the Tracey Friley in whatever space they're in to make having a passport, especially for Black and brown people. And that's the same as disadvantage.
Right.
I'm a professional, upper middle class person who, again, only in my 50s started thinking, maybe I can go to Curacao just to go.
Right. Well, you're talking about normalizing something,
Normalizing it, yes.
Right. You're talking about normalizing something, and outside in some ways it's socioeconomic also, because in just straight up in white families at certain socioeconomic status, a passport is as normal as a driver's license, like you said. It's something they have. Kids are like, oh, I'm going to take a gap year. And if you talk to, there was a time when you talk to a parent about a gap year, they're like, oh no, there will be no break between high school and college, because they would be afraid, right, that their kid would not get to that first year of college.
Right.
And so, but that means that there needs to be some understanding of the value of this. And I think National Geographic Travel, the editor, called me when he introduced me on stage in DC, he called me a travel educator. And I was, I wasn't calling myself anything, right? I was just doing it. And what I realized all these years later is that I spent a lot of time, managing anxious parents who said yes. Right? Because the ones who said no, and I would tell people who were advocating for me, when you're out there trying to help because people wanted to help, you're going to get more, it's sales, right? You're going to get more no's than yeses. And your job isn't to try to talk people into doing something that they're not ready to do. That's a fact. Your job is to find the people who are ready and to teach by example, to show them that this is okay. That I would go to Facebook groups that were all like Black kids or, and I would post these pictures of all these kids, and you would see the parents say, this is fantastic, but I would never let my kid go away. And then you would find the ones who said, well, I would, can she go next year? So the idea is to, you can't change fear and lack of trust by just having a conversation with somebody. The examples and seeing things over and over and over again, normalizing travel, and people understanding and being educated about how to be safe, where to go, where not to go, what's good, what's not good. All these things are what I spent a lot of time doing. So Passport to Youth Travel is this 6-week course that I developed where my plan is to, again, create this army of people and to tell them all the things that I did right and all the things that I did wrong, right? So that they can skip over those things. At 100% safety record. And I was really old school because when I went away, you didn't talk to your parents. Like there were care packages and letters, right? So I had this thing, there were no phones allowed. And there was no contact with parents. And, so I just cut off about another 50% of people. But social media, there's good and bad. But the great part is that I was able to show parents every day, here are your children, here's what they're doing. look. And so there was a sense of calm. You're anxious about your children. You should be. If you just push your kids and go away and don't have any energy, then I'm going to be suspicious.
Here's the reality, though. And my children are all grown and adult now, but I raised my children in Brooklyn, New York. My mentee I'm talking about from Dorothy Jean is a teenager in Chicago. The same fear you might have sending them to Ghana.
Right.
That same parental fear is when they go to another neighborhood that's not your neighborhood.
Exactly.
Because it's not really about the distance and the location. It's about they're out of your sight, they're out of your control.
Yeah, nowadays, if they just go to school, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
It's sad but true. So part of the reason I think some of the parents who I've gotten to meet here in Chicago who say, yes, I want my child to go, it's almost like they almost might be safer there with you than they are. It's a sad thing to say.
It's a controlled environment.
Yes,
right? It's a controlled environment. It's not everybody's out here willy-nilly. Right. It's controlled, and it is about trust on a lot of levels. They have to trust that the program that their children are going with have done their job also. Yes. And they've given parents all the information they need. They know exactly where their kids are. They know in an emergency, what the exit plan is, they know all these things. So it's a much bigger job than just from the administrative side, right? It's a much bigger job than just giving out passports and taking kids on trips. When you create a program, there's also this thing about gratitude. There was always a philanthropic part of every single trip. There wasn't one kid that has been on a trip with me that didn't hear my speech on gratitude, that travel is a gift, that you are doing things that your friends aren't doing right now. No one is here right now doing what we're doing. The attitude that, they're developmentally, teenagers are teenagers, right? The attitude that you can have. I've been here 100 times and I get to come back, but you need to make the most of this experience. And I would have the kids write thank you notes to their parents while they were there and give them speeches about how everybody's parents not letting them do this, and make them understand what was happening. And so Libraries Without Borders, I would have the girls pack books and then we would go donate them. I stopped doing the orphanage. I did an orphanage once and I'm not into it for a variety of reasons. We could talk about it another time. Sure. But there was always this component of giving back to the place that you're going. Look, we learn about our culture here in the United States, and that's what we learn, right? It's every culture does. Every culture has this idea of what their culture is. Until you go somewhere else and hear somebody else tell you what they think of your culture, you don't have, these kids need to hear what other people think. So instead of, oh, they eat that, it's like, oh, that's interesting. They eat that. I wanted them to reframe how they think, and that global awareness begins at home. Every kid in America goes to school with someone from a different country.
Yes.
Right. So start at home. And I know there's peer pressure, but when you see a kid like praying before a meal or eating something you've never seen before, a real traveler is curious. They want to know maybe you can't do it in front of your peers, but you can do it later or go look it up when you get home. But the way that don't be what I really don't want them to turn into is the people that travel and talk about how wonderful it is and come home and still have the same ideologies.
Right.
That they had before they left. So it's really just kind of, a place to hang out and have a cocktail. Nothing wrong with that. But right. I think that for children in particular, it's more than them just going down a water slide at a park. It's about understanding where they are, taking the academics that they learn and adding the experiential, so that I've seen so many light bulbs go off with adults too, because I take adult women on trips too. Well, some that didn't have their passports till they were 50 years old.
I know there are adults who got their first passport
50, 60 years old, right? And they're like, oh, I'm late. And I'm like, no, you're not late. Now is now,
Now is
right?
now.
You do it when you do it. And it's because some people never do it. So is the pandemic, you asked me this earlier, is the pandemic going to shift? Are parents going to be any more afraid now than they were before? Some are, and some aren't.
Right.
And I don't think that it should, the thing about travel for kids is it's generally seasonal, right? Because most kids are in school.
Right.
So it's summertime, outside, and so the risk factors, my job is to do risk assessment, right? So the risk factors are lower when the program directors are doing risk assessment and evaluating what's going to be this. I'm sure you guys have done this. What's going to be the safest way for us to move around Ghana? Right. And because those are things you do have to consider. And I think as you build, it's about building relationships with the people that are allowing their children to travel with you. Grandparents want in on the calls when we would have these group calls. Everybody wants to know, what are you going to do with my kid? I think it's still going to, this pandemic is a tricky sucker,
Right.
And everybody has a different view on it, and everybody has been impacted in a different way.
Yes.
Some people are immunocompromised and who never had an issue before, all of a sudden have to worry about what it means to just get on a plane.
Right.
Or be outside in a restaurant, right? So I think that it's not a reason not to create programs, because where the programs really begin is with this kind of global awareness initiative anyway. Right. That's what it is.
Whether you travel or not, you need to be globally, our young people, but people in general need to be globally aware. And this is Black Enterprise, so I do want to speak to that in a more practical sense.
Of course.
Obviously, Black Enterprise, we're covering successful entrepreneurs, we're covering successful executives in corporate America, leaders in general.
Right.
And a common theme has emerged certainly over the past 30 years, and I would argue even longer, but certainly over the past 30 years. In each of those venues, people with international exposure, international experience, international connectivity excel, overperform, make more money. In corporate America, you're going to be more likely to get the promotions. You're going to be more likely to get to the C-suite. You're going to be more likely to get those plumbing projects because of your counterpart says, yes, I will take that assignment in Hong Kong. And You're saying, I think I'll stay in the States.
Right.
So we've seen it happen over and over again when we see who advances in corporate America. When you see those entrepreneurs, we're all talking about scale. Yeah, you can scale and stay in the United States. It's a big market. Right. But most of the time, scale means you got to be able to either source raw materials from overseas, source labor from overseas, source new customers from overseas, partners from overseas, capital from overseas. So once again, if you're talking about building huge multi-billion dollar companies, and we're just on the verge of doing that as African Americans over the last 20 years, you're not talking about, oh yeah, we're going to be right here in Chicago or in LA and Watson. That's what we're going to do. Right. And so when you talk to me about the young lady who came back and ultimately worked for you,
right?
I'm seeing seeds planted of a different kind when you have kids who got their passport when they were 12 to travel by the time they were 15, and now they're 27 and they got a shot at a plum assignment. They're like, yes. Send me to Europe. Yes, send me to South America.
No question.
I've been there before. I know the language. I know the culture. Send me.
Right.
And what that means, as you said, as you build an army, again, Tracey Friley acolytes who exponentially impact that. I just see a larger, more even practical Black enterprise, practical goal of creating this generation that really can compete on a global scale, literally, whether they're entrepreneurs, professionals, corporate executives or whatever. And they're going to come from these young people that we're talking to right now.
Global experiences teach you how to adapt. Entrepreneurship, corporate work, all of it, got to be adaptable. I mean, there's all these critical thinking skills. You got to be able to think where you are, what you're doing, is it safe? You're meeting people from different cultures. You have to be able to
managing people from different cultures.
Yeah, yes,
even
absolutely.
if you're based in the United States, if you have responsibilities for markets outside the United States, you got to understand those markets and be able to manage people and resources.
You have to understand their culture. I have been in France doing business with French people, and I have had, and in the beginning, I was like, whoa, because I didn't understand that no didn't mean no, right? I didn't understand that. And once you start to understand a culture, then what you understand when you go to deal in, Ghana or Mexico or anywhere else is that culturally people are different, and that it's not a bad thing. It's an interesting thing, and that you are going to have to be able to adapt to lead them if that's your role, or to work with them as a team if that's your role, whatever it is. So for these kids to get it early without even understanding that that's what it is, that they're, exercising their critical thinking muscle, that skill that a lot of people need to exercise a little bit more, right? That they will be able to work in the world, like you say, to work globally and not just domestically. The young lady that worked for me is finishing law school now. She can work anywhere in the world. She can, and I know that, and if she takes a job here or not, that's not really the deal. It doesn't matter. I think that's fabulous too. But the idea that she understands just automatically, it's been normalized for her from an early age. She's like, oh yeah, anywhere in the world. And that's a big deal. Kids, like you say, sometimes don't even go out of their own neighborhoods. The pandemic is creating, because of fear, right? It's creating, people are shrinking into their spaces. And, there's good and bad in that, I guess. But at the end of the day, the world is not just your neighborhood. It is not just our state. It is not just our country. There's a whole world out there, and everybody's going to space. So there's another one too.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's all these things out there in the world. And I think it serves the future. These kids these are kids that could change the world just because they, like anything, because they think they can, because they've been told they can, because they have access, because the book is access, is what it is. It's really, really access. And it's just I think I ended up a finalist in a contest because I talked about that little blue book that could change the world, that people who may travel a lot kind of take for granted a little bit. But it's not to be taken for granted. Gratitude for everything. Right? I'm grateful I'm here, that you're having me here. I'm grateful for all the experiences that I've had that have led me to where I am today, to even want to continue what I think is legacy work for me. I really think I'm giving a piece of myself to every person that I coach about what's important about these programs. I hear a lot of people talk about, I just want to travel with them. I want to take them wherever. And I'm like, let's come back. That's where the coaching part comes in, and why I developed the course and why I have these opportunities. So you can come back to the foundation, because foundation is everything, right? The trip is fabulous. And if it's done well, it's an educational opportunity like no other. That's the whole point of this. But you want to give them something to think about, so that while they're gone, they can hear you. That's what I hear kids say. I can hear you. I can still hear you saying all these things to me about what I should be considering. And like I said, instead of oh, why do they do that? It's kind of like, oh, wow, I wonder why they do that. And then finding out, and then and then you have information that can make you stand out for college applications.
Yes.
These kids that are traveling 11 to 15 years old, they getting ready to fill out these college applications. When college is looking at, your service and grades and all these other things, they're also looking at how exposed you've been, because it does change their experience in school. I don't think if they're not exposed right away that their experience is bad at all. I really don't. I don't think one is horrible and one isn't. I think because like I said, like you said, you didn't start moving into the world until you were in your 20s. And just now are like, oh, wow, I can go just have a good time, right?
Meet people,
As opposed to, going from place to base, conference to conference. And now I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that still.
Yes.
I mean, really.
There is.
Dramatically, though.
Yes.
Right? In a big way.
Yeah.
And so you're just shifting, how, not that you do it. It's just kind of how you go about doing it. And so, and we're also at a different stage in our lives also.
I think that's probably the biggest.
It's kind of like,
yeah.
Can I get a cocktail?
So I do want to make a point, because I don't want to dwell on it because we're running out of time, but I do want to make a point. You talked about college applications.
Yeah.
And as more universities, especially some of the major, quote unquote elite universities, are moving away from standardized tests as a way, for good reasons, that the cultural bias of the tests and therefore predictors of success. But I remind people, parents and others, and even young people, that there can be a cultural bias or cultural disadvantage experientially if you don't have the experience. Like you said, there is a social economic factor. Let's say standardized tests are not going to be used to determine whether you get in or not. If you're competing against for a possible seat at a school with somebody who's been to 3 different countries, and you haven't been out of Chicago, or you haven't been out of Newark.
Yeah.
The standardized test takes away one level of disadvantage, bias, but it doesn't take away all of them. Right. So again, just me making another case for why this idea of a young person having a passport as common as having their driver's license, to me, it's a very, very, very big deal.
Yeah, we could. I mean, honestly, you and I could talk for 100 hours about the value of, the list is
having a passport.
You know what I mean? On why just having a passport is important, let alone the awareness portion, and then let alone the actual travel and the what that brings about. So, I know you're down. I'm down. I'm ready to create this army. I just need to find them.
Well, let's get to that in a moment. Just tell the Beyond the Hype audience how they can get involved with what you're doing. And again, I say this to the audience, if it's not for you, it's for someone you know. So don't think, oh, it's not for me. Think it's not for me, but somebody else needs to know about Tracey Friley. Somebody else needs to know about her programs. Somebody else needs to know, whether it's teachers, other parents, students, somebody needs to know. So that's that spirit. I definitely want people who are here for Beyond the Hype to take it, if not for themselves, for others that might be in their universe, their sphere of influence. So what's the best way for people to follow up on what you're doing, Tracey?
If you, like you said, if you or someone that you know is a passionate youth travel advocate, okay, you believe in the power of the passport, and you want to start a teen travel program, whether that entails global awareness as a base right now, and you don't want to travel, or if it includes the whole shebang, the Passport to Youth travel online course is starting up in a couple of months. It's ongoing. It's a 6-week course. And there's a great deal of value in this program. I encourage anyone who's interested to give me a holler at passporttoyouthtravel.com. And I'd be happy to help in any way that I can. Anyone who knows any sponsors who want to sponsor a group of people who want to do the same. I'm all about that, because then I can create a movement. I can say, hey, this company believes also in the power of the passport, and they want to empower an army too. And so we can all get out there and help change this next generation and turn them into global citizens. It benefits all of us. So.
If people want to follow you on social, what's the best way to do that?
Passport to Youth Travel on Facebook, Passport to Youth Travel on Instagram, and Passport to Travel, youthtravel.com. Passport to Youth Travel, Facebook, Instagram, and .com.
Thank you so much, Tracey. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love talking to you anyway. So,
yay.
As with most of my guests, we don't just talk on Beyond the Hype. We actually talk. But
yeah.
It's so great to have you on the show. I think the timing of this conversation is perfect. And I wish you the best in everything that you're doing. And anything I can do to help, just call me. Let me know.
Appreciate you. Yeah.
Because I believe in the power of the passport. So thank you for joining us for Beyond the Hype.
Thank you.
This is Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor-at-Large at Black Enterprise. You just heard another great edition of Beyond the Hype. This episode has been brought to you by JP Morgan Chase. Take care. Get that passport. Help somebody else get a passport. And we'll see you next time on Beyond the Hype.